Hi guys, Ukraine is being expected to trust two individuals who are not operating in its best interests, that being Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Now, attempts to force some sort of settlement by the Americans, which would result in about 20% of Ukraine being handed over to Russia with little or no concessions on Putin's side, has been rejected by both Zelensky and his European allies. But why the Americans are so interested in a final agreement will probably shock you. Here, Clinton Institute Professor of American Studies Scott Lucas explains how a lot of this is about Donald Trump's ego.
So Ukraine is being asked, or almost being told, that it has to give up about a quarter of its country to Russia. That's the U.S. terms. But that's not all. Ukraine has to promise not to join NATO. Ukraine, while it will get some security guarantees, these are not spelled out in the U.S. document. While there will be funds for Ukraine's recovery, these are not spelled out in the U.S. document. And in the meantime, the U.S. will pursue economic opportunities with Russia, including in the energy and industrial sectors. And of course, to pursue economic opportunities, you would have to lift sanctions.
And that's what Donald Trump wants. I'll continue with the video in just a moment, but that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants the sanctions lifted so he can operate again with Russia. And what's standing in that way? In the way of that, Ukraine is standing in the way. So that's why Donald Trump wants Ukraine sorted out. That's in part. Another part is related to his ego.
On Moscow. So Moscow gets pretty much everything that it's been asking for, except for the fall of the Zelensky government. And Ukraine only gets these very, very vague commitments that, yeah, okay, we'll have your back if Russia attacks again. A couple of days ago, without referring to those proposals, Vladimir Zelensky said Ukraine will never give up part of its territory. We will never give up Crimea, part of sovereign territory. And that's the tip-off. That, look, Ukrainian officials will accept that they cannot regain Crimea. They'll know they can't push the Russian military out of them. But for them to say that Russia annexes Crimea, it violates the Ukrainian constitution, it violates international law, and it also would not be accepted by the Ukrainian people. So
what Donald Trump wants is for the Ukrainian people to accept a situation which will be against their own constitution, which will be in breach of international law. Just think about that for a moment. Donald Trump wants the international community to ignore international law in order for Putin to be satisfied, in order to allow Donald Trump to operate within Russia.
What has happened is that this week, Ukraine has probably not only had that public statement by Zelensky, they've privately told the Americans, we're not going to agree to your deal this week. So Donald Trump is not going to get his photo opportunity with Vladimir Putin. He's not, as he said at a White House gathering a couple days ago, he's not going to get the deal. And when the Americans realized they weren't going to get the deal because the terms are unacceptable to Ukraine, they walked.
Think about that. It was about Donald Trump having a photo opportunity on the 100th day of his administration, of his presidency. Donald Trump didn't get his way. So he told his Secretary of State, he told his administration officials, we're not doing any meetings with the Europeans, with Britain. They were supposed to send a delegation to Britain, a senior delegation. Instead, they sent a junior delegation to meetings, peace meetings between Ukraine and Europe, including the UK.
And although it was only confirmed at the last minute, and they probably did not confirm they were walking until the last minute, Ukraine and Europe were prepared for it. They were prepared for this to walk. So they go ahead with their own meetings today. They meet the lower level U.S. officials, and they put the ball back in the American court, which is, do you really want to be allied with the Kremlin in issuing an ultimatum to Kyiv? Within the last few minutes, before I talk to you, there have been a couple of developments. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Sidorenko, has restated that Ukraine will negotiate, but it will not surrender. And J.D. Vance, the vice president, has weighed in, as J.D. Vance will, which is, again, to reissue the U.S. ultimatum. Accept the deal, or we're out of here. Well, Vladimir Zelensky has been lectured by J.D. Vance before. We all know that. And he didn't give in to J.D. Vance on that occasion, and I don't think he's going to give in to J.D. Vance in the Trump administration. So where we are, as I speak to you, is that the London meeting has collapsed at a high level, but we're back to where we were just a few days ago. And that is, will the Trump administration swing back towards the Kremlin? And meanwhile, will Europe continue, and the international community, will it continue to give Ukraine the vital support that it needs, financial, economic, and military, so that Russia does not try to make further gains on the battlefield?
Fascinating. I'll leave a link to the full clip in the description of this video. I do recommend listening to it. We're in a situation where Ukraine has been expected to trust not just Vladimir Putin, but also Donald Trump. Now, how can anyone trust Donald Trump? He's torn up international agreements. The very first thing he did, his very first day in office, remember Donald Trump said that he'd resolve all of this in 24 hours, but the very first day in office, he tore up the Paris Climate Agreement. This is not somebody you can work with. So Ukraine is right to dismiss any sort of security guarantee that the US would promise, because it's not worth the paper it's written on. Because Donald Trump is not somebody you can trust. Trump wanted his photo opportunity. He didn't get that, so he threw his toys out of the pram. He told his officials, don't go to that meeting. We're not getting involved. We're going to focus on Russia instead. Trump wants to have a better relationship with Putin. I believe at the end of the day, he wants access to the Russian market for American businesses, or for himself. He wants to build a casino or something there. It's as trivial as that. And standing in the way is Ukraine. And that's why Zelensky was humiliated in the White House. He's not bending the knee. He's not doing what they want. Trump wants people who are sycophants. Trump wants people who will say, yes, sir. How high do you want me to jump? Trump admires people like Putin because they get people around them to be sycophants, to be yes men, to do as they're told. They live in fear of the dear leader. And Trump admires that, and he's envious of that sort of power. You see it in this administration. No one is saying boo to him. Anyone who does is long gone. So Zelensky is now in a situation where he has to rely on Europe. But I've been saying this for some time. You can't rely on the United States with Donald Trump in charge. I think even support under the Biden administration was starting to run out. But under Donald Trump, it's completely gone. Europeans, I think, should ignore Donald Trump at this stage. Plan for a situation where Donald Trump is allying with Russia. This may sound hyperbolic, but I can predict a time where Donald Trump is selling weapons to Russia which are being used against Ukraine. Donald Trump does not care about Ukraine. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. And the sooner the UK and Europe wake up to that reality, the better. And especially the United Kingdom, where at least in Europe, you're seeing a realization that Donald Trump is not somebody you can deal with. But in the UK, with Keir Starmer, he still seems to cling on to this hope that maybe I'm wrong here, but he seems to cling on to this hope that maybe one day Donald Trump will actually be a decent individual, somebody you can actually work with, somebody who's trustworthy.